Hey guys, welcome back to a brand new video. In today's video, we are going to be looking at the 2024 presidential election and another vaccinated person suggestion. So, someone DM'd me on Twitter today saying they got vaccinated today, so I think this is one of the only couple, I think I've gotten quite a few messages about for my vaccination video incentive, but I think this is one of the first, or I think the third maybe, of someone who got vaccinated today. So, you know who you are if you're watching this video. Thank you so much for getting vaccinated. I truly appreciate it. And this is a really unique video because we have two very interesting politicians from the same state. So, Joe Manchin is as most of us know, a conservative Democratic senator from West Virginia. He's probably the most moderate Democrat in the Senate, and he's a pretty interesting guy, politically speaking. Jim Justice is a liberal Republican, I guess you could say, or a liberal populist Republican. He's kind of an interesting breed. And he was actually a Democrat when first elected as governor in 2016, switched to the GOP in 2017, switched back to the Democrats in 2018, and then since I think the end of 2018 has been a Republican. So it's only a matter of time before he switches back to a Democrat. I'm kidding, but he's a pretty interesting guy. He shares views that are both Democratic and Republican. You know, he's very he's been more liberal on COVID. He's been very, very pro-mask, very, very pro-vaccine. But, you know, he's more of a populist, and he has rallied with Donald Trump in the past. So, interesting candidates. I guess you should do more research into them because my descriptions of them are going to be very vague. And I'm not going to be doing as good of a job as, you know, you could at researching these candidates. So, we're going to get right into it. Joe Manchin, I think he'd do fairly well in some of these areas. There would be some drawback, I think, with progressives who just wouldn't vote because they think Manchin's too conservative, and that would hurt him in states like Oregon and Washington, so I'm actually not going to characterize Washington. So the margins in both what to see here is that, you know, a lot of people in the Democratic Party would call Manchin a dino and Republicans would call Justice a rhino. So we could see some reduced margins in a lot of states, especially those states, you know, that are more Trumpian or more progressive. So that would certainly be really interesting to see. And I'm kind of just going to fill this map out as I go along. Justice, he'd probably win a lot of these states by safe margins. Manchin would do okay with some ancestral Democrats in you know, the Dakotas, maybe some in Oklahoma, maybe some in Louisiana. I'll leave Louisiana blank, but yeah. So this is shaping up to be a really interesting video because I'm going to question all my decisions all the decisions that I make here. So I think I'll have that be Jim Justice's safe states. So if you're wondering why Indiana is isolated as a safe red state, when Kentucky and West Virginia and Tennessee are not, that's because Indiana has, out of these states, by far the least amount of ancestral Democrats, and I just don't see Manchin getting very good numbers in Indianapolis, and Justice would just carry it anyways. For likely Democratic states, I think we've got quite a few. We've got, we have Washington likely, Oregon likely, I think New Mexico and Colorado would be likely. Washington and Oregon, they're safe ordinarily, but there would be and same goes for California, but California is just D plus 30. Like, California is, each of these states has their own kind of tier of democraticness. Washington's like D plus 20, Oregon's like D plus 15, California's like D plus 30. So, Manchin would regress in California for sure, but it wouldn't really be enough to make it fall into the likely category. And Oregon and Washington, since they're a bit less democratic, we could see like a lot of third-party voting here. Manchin would win Washington with like 53%, and then maybe even like 50% to like 38% for Justice. So that would be weird because there are a lot of progressives, and Bernie Sanders did do fairly well in the Oregon and Washington Democratic primaries in 2016. New Mexico and Colorado, I think, would just stay similar. Colorado's pretty progressive as well. There are a lot of Democrats who might not vote for Joe Manchin, but I still think that, I guess I'll have his lean to be safe, but I still think that it would be a solid state for him, I guess. But lean is kind of the safe categorization, if that's a word. Yeah, I think it is. I can't believe I forgot that. Virginia would also be likely. It's pretty close to West Virginia, and the suburbs of, Nova suburbs are just going to keep the state blue for the most part, I would say. There wouldn't be too much regression for Manchin among Democrats because Virginia Democrats are quite moderate anyways. Illinois would also be likely. There could be some progressives in Cook County that maybe wouldn't turn out for Manchin as much, but he'd still do well enough downstate, and he'd make improvements downstate and do well in the Chicago suburbs. So still probably a likely D state. So and Minnesota as well. Minnesota's a state where I think Manchin would do quite well in. Justice is a populist, but not kind of the populist you'd expect in Minnesota. Maybe more of like it's hard to explain his breed because he is kind of socially liberal, but at the same time not. He's a really interesting guy, but I think he's not a great fit for Minnesota, whereas Manchin is, so just kind of my gut feeling there. Again, this is not going to be the actual matchup, so I don't have to be accurate at all. Alaska would be likely for Justice. Actually, Justice I think would win it safe, on second thought. Montana would be likely. Missouri, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, those in South Carolina. So Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Louisiana, Mississippi would be likely because there'd be some sort of ancestral Democrat reversion that would really help out Manchin, but at the same time still would not really affect these states. They just narrow up a little bit. South Carolina is just a definition of a likely Republican state. It's always likely, always has been. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that. That would be likely for Joe Manchin. Jim Justice, I think he'd also probably carry West Virginia by a likely margin. He's the governor there. He won in 2016, I believe. He won by like 10%, and then in 2020 he won by like 35. So he's quite popular there. Joe Manchin in 2012 won big, but in 2018 he only won by 3. So I think that we'd see some really wacky coalitions. But at the end of the day, Justice is just Justice would win because of the R next to his name, and West Virginia Democrats still do have lost their their voter registration edge in West Virginia. A couple months ago, the GOP actually overtook them. So, yeah. I think that is it for our likely Republican states. Manchin, for his lean states, I think he'd do quite well in Arizona. It's weird to see Arizona and Colorado the same shade of blue, because Colorado usually votes like 10 to 15 points to the left of Arizona, but because of these coalitions for Joe Manchin, I think they would be. Arizona, they like mavericks. They like to elect moderates, especially statewide. That's why Mark Kelly's popular there. Kirsten Sinema is interesting. She won in 2018 kind of as a moderate, but she's been even more moderate than people thought she would be in 2018. But, Manchin, I think, would still do quite well with Hispanics, especially in Pima County, and suburban voters in Arizona, I think, would stay for him, because he is a populist, but at the same time, he still kind of has that normie conservative Democrat feel that suburbanites would be more comfortable with him than someone like Jim Justice, who's, like I've said throughout this video, an entirely different breed. What else it would be lean for Joe Manchin? I think that he'd probably win Pennsylvania by a lean margin, as well as Michigan, get him up to 267. Pennsylvania would probably go for Joe Manchin, mostly because I would say he'd probably win it, because he'd do very well in the Philly suburbs. He'd do quite well in Allegheny. There'd be a bit of a reversion in Philadelphia itself, but the suburbs would stay pretty blue. Allegheny would stay blue, and Manchin would do quite well in the areas kind of surrounding Pittsburgh, like Beaver County and the areas of the current 17th district, that more ancestral Democrat areas. Michigan, I just think, would kind of stay lean. The coalitions would change for sure. Justice would run significantly ahead of Trump in Wayne County, but Manchin would do quite well in the areas like Oakland County, in rural Michigan, like especially up north. He'd do pretty well there. He might actually win the Upper Peninsula, because Trump won it by 13, but the coalitions would change, so we could see it be more in play for Joe Manchin, but he'd lose a lot of support in Detroit. So, again, really weird coalitions. The county maps would be insane for this, but yeah. For Jim Justice, I think he would carry Texas by a lean margin. Texas is weird because Manchin, he's done, in 2018 he did do quite well with Hispanics in West Virginia. There's not a ton of them there. I think the state's only like 5% Hispanic, but he did pretty well with them. He ran ahead of Biden with West Virginia Hispanics. And I also think that Manchin would do alright in the Collin and Denton suburbs, but rural Texas I just still wouldn't see flipping for Joe Manchin. In 2018 he did well in rural West Virginia, but rural Texas is kind of an entirely different breed. It's very different for rural West Virginia. I just think Justice would be a better fit to hold on, especially because, I talked about his populism, how it might not fit Minnesota, but I think it would fit Texas a lot better than Minnesota. Another lean state for Justice, I do believe he'd carry the state of Nevada by a lean margin, and you might be confused by this because why would Arizona go blue but Nevada would go red? I just think Justice wouldn't, or I think Manchin would just do really poorly in Clark County. He'd win it, but he'd only win it by like 5 or 6, which is not the margin Democrats need there. I don't think he'd do too much better in the rural areas. Be safe, I'll have it as tilt Republican, but I think Nevada, my hot take would be that Jim Justice would win it in this scenario. Justice would also probably carry Iowa, Ohio by late margins, as well as Maine's 2nd congressional district. Maine's 2nd district, Manchin could kind of pull off enough of a reversion to make it closer than it was in 2020, but Justice would still hold on to these rural voters because Manchin has the advantage of being able to revert ancestral Democrats, but at the same time, the populist vote would come out for Jim Justice. Same thing in Iowa and Ohio. We could see rural areas being stronger for Manchin, but populist voters, especially working class voters, might be a little more friendly to Jim Justice. So that would be interesting to see. Now for our tilt states, New Hampshire's weird. I'll just say it's lean to be more cautious, but it's in New Hampshire. I have no idea who would win that. So that gives a Manchin 270. I think he'd win Wisconsin by a tilt margin. Actually, you know what? No. I'll give it to Justice. Just for fun, I'll give Wisconsin to Justice. These states, I really don't know who'd win them. Manchin's from West Virginia, so I think he'd have appeal to maybe more Appalachian voters in North Carolina. I think North Carolina could be tilt. Florida would be really close. I think Justice would win Georgia, though. Manchin wouldn't do as well with black voters, and I think that the suburbs of Atlanta, although they might be strong for him, they might not be as strong for him as other suburbs, and rural Georgia could turn out for Justice, because they, kind of do like his breed of populism, more so than those in rural North Carolina, because rural North Carolina and rural Georgia are very different. In some cases, rural North Carolina can be 15 points more Democratic than rural Georgia, despite the fact that Georgia is a bluer state than North Carolina. So, interesting coalitions there. Florida's kind of a pure toss-up. I'll give it to Justice because it went red in 2020, but I really don't know who'd win it. So, this is the electoral map. It's a really interesting coalition. As you can see, a lot of these states are, like I said at the beginning of the video, there are going to be a lot of states that are likely that shouldn't be likely. We saw, I'll even label Vermont as likely just for fun, but we saw Washington and Oregon be likely D. At the same time as West Virginia and Tennessee. You don't usually see that. So, really interesting suggestion. Thank you so much for getting vaccinated to the person who suggested this video, and I'm glad I did, because this video might not get the most views, and I understand that, only the hardcore political junkies like me are going to appreciate the video, but if you did, which I hope you did, by the way, I hope you leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, hopefully, and I'll see you all next one.